Something big is happening in Dubai, and it's not what you're seeing on the news. Behind all that glimmer and gold, a quiet mass exodus of money and talent is underway. And believe me, it is way more serious than you think. We're going to break down what's really happening behind the curtain, how it all started, and what it means for the future of global business. So let's get right into it. Dubai is over. Whoa, just think about that sentence for a second. That's not coming from some critic or a rival city. That's what a wealth manager in Singapore said just this week, in between fielding call after call from clients desperately trying to move their millions out of the Gulf. But to really get how a city that successful could suddenly be seen as over, you first have to understand the powerful promise it sold to the entire world. For years, Dubai's pitch was basically the most successful sales pitch on the planet. It was a haven, right, an oasis, and it was all built on a handful of promises and one unspoken, unbreakable guarantee. And man, did it work. Just last year alone, nearly 10,000 millionaires packed up and moved to Dubai, and they brought an incredible $63 billion in new assets with them. The city was, without a doubt, the #1 spot for the world's wealthy and ambitious. On the surface, the pitch was super simple. Zero income tax, amazing world-class infrastructure. But the real product, the thing that truly mattered, was that unspoken guarantee. Whatever chaos happens in the Middle East, it stays out of Dubai. Your money, your business, your life, it would all be safe here. That was the story. That was the bedrock, the foundation, everything was built on. And then just like that, in a single night, that story, that fundamental promise was completely shattered. On February 28th, that guarantee was broken. The attack was just massive. We're talking 137 missiles and 209 drones. You've probably seen the videos online, the explosions. But that, believe it or not, isn't the real story. The real story is what happened in the 72 hours that came after. And this is where it all gets so much worse. It wasn't about the explosions, it was about the plumbing. Over the next 3 days, the invisible infrastructure, the very guts of the city that makes a global hub work, it just broke down, revealing a vulnerability nobody thought was possible. Let's just tick through the list. The airport, the city's lifeline to the world, shut down, severed. The port, where all the physical goods move, frozen. The banking system started glitching after a data center was hit, locking people out of their own money right when they needed it most. And here's the kicker. Because the UAE imports 90% of its food, the entire supply chain was suddenly at risk. This wasn't just an attack. It was a total systemic failure. So you'd expect panic, right? Chaos in the streets? But the reaction from the very people who had bet their fortunes on Dubai's stability wasn't panic. It was something way more chilling. It was cold, hard calculation. Within days, the phones at wealth management firms started ringing off the hook. But these weren't people screaming in fear. These were calm, collected entrepreneurs and investors all asking the same simple question. How fast can we get out? And the scale of this was just immediate. One advisor in Singapore reported that in a single week, over a third of his Dubai-based clients called him to talk about relocating. This wasn't a slow leak, people. This was the beginning of a flood. And we are not talking about small-time players here. The average asset value of the clients planning to pull out right away was $50 million each. This is serious money, deciding that the risk is just not worth it anymore. This quote from one of those clients, it just says it all, doesn't it? How fast can I move everything to Singapore? Not some of it. Everything. That's not hedging a bet. That is a complete and total withdrawal. It's a total loss of faith. So where's all this money and talent going, right? They aren't just scattering to the wind. They're making very specific, very strategic moves to places that can now offer the one thing that Dubai just lost. Look, the perception of Dubai flipped overnight. It went from being this stable oasis to a high-risk zone with shaky infrastructure. And all of a sudden, hubs like Singapore and Hong Kong started looking incredibly attractive because they offer the very things that now matter most: stability, predictable laws, and infrastructure that's been proven to work under pressure. See, it's not just about low taxes anymore. Singapore and Hong Kong are winning because they offer a complete operating system for business. Singapore is a top-tier wealth hub and the perfect gateway to Southeast Asia. And Hong Kong? It offers unbeatable access to China's manufacturing and supply chains. They solve real fundamental business problems. And this brings us to the absolute heart of the issue. This isn't just a temporary dip or some market correction. What we're talking about here is a permanent fracture of the single most important asset any financial hub has: trust. Think about it this way. You can rebuild a skyscraper or a fancy hotel pretty quickly, but how do you rebuild trust in a banking system that failed you in a crisis? How do you restore faith in a promise of safety that was so completely broken? That is a much, much harder thing to fix. So in response, these entrepreneurs are now building their businesses in a totally new way. They're adopting what's being called the China +1+1 model. It's really just a strategy to protect themselves from risk by spreading their operations across multiple stable locations so that no single point of failure can take down their whole company. And this right here is the most important part. An advisor put it perfectly. The people who are leaving aren't just making a financial calculation, they're making an emotional one. Because you know what? Trust doesn't live on a spreadsheet. The core lessons are crystal clear. 1, the invisible plumbing of a city is everything. 2, trust is way harder to rebuild than any skyscraper. And 3, the era of betting your entire life on a single city might just be over. So the big lesson here isn't simply that Dubai is bad and Singapore is good. No, the real lesson is a much bigger question that every entrepreneur now needs to ask. What happens when the core assumption, the story that you've built your business and your entire life around, proves to be wrong? That's the question now being answered in real time at a cost of billions and billions of dollars.